We're recording now. I had forgotten to resume recording. So from here on, this will be recorded. So all that stuff we said about named PEOs will not be recorded. That's good. You know that the PEO charges for the payroll taxes, the state unemployment, the federal unemployment, the workers' comp rate, and the admin fee. That's all the basic prices that we know. The basic payroll expenses. As you see here is the Social Security, the Medicare, and the SUDA-FUDA. So in Florida alone, with a new company, you can see it's already at 11%, 10.95 before anything else is on there, just for the taxes, just for Uncle Donald's share, just what he takes. Well, actually, I think it's Uncle DeSantis, Uncle Ron at the state. He gets most of this. Okay, and the admin fee. Ted, you can correct me. These numbers are probably low, but typically a PEO wants to get between $450 to $1,800 per year per employee.
I think that's spot on.
What's that?
I think that's spot on.
Okay, well, I think Insperity's over that, right?
Insperity is $225 a month per employee.
Yeah, so that would be like about 27. What is it? That's $3,000 a year, isn't it?
That's $2,700 a year.
$2,700 a year. So they're pretty higher. And of course, that's whatever they put in their admin fee or their fees or the health insurance fees or whatever they put. That's the number they're trying to get to. That's their target. If a PEO is being run correctly, if they've got a good accountant and a good financial plan, they've got an amount they want to make per employee. And of course, some of them will discount to get lower just to get business on the books. I don't think that's a good idea, but they do it. Obviously, things that can affect the price of what state they're in. As we know, California, Illinois, New York are very expensive because they've got those, well, they each have their own problems. In Illinois and New York, it's Chicago and New York City, but in California, it's just the whole state. What level of service, the amount of, an admin fee is often used to cover the comp risk. So the comp history will vary. And health insurance, when I put health insurance affects the price, it's actually figured into the price because sometimes some of the PEOs do plan on making money on health insurance, which is really risky. I know it's a bigger risk than comp. Comp's a lot easier to predict than health. One of the things we noticed when I got into insurance back in like 2002 is that back then, comp was rarely used. Health insurance was used by just about everybody. So it's not but again, they go through some kind of complex mathematical formula to come up with those numbers, $450 to $1,800 per year per employee. That's what their goal are. And of course, you all know how the comp rates are set by codes. I'm not teaching anybody anything here, I'm sure. Everybody wants to be... Little story. Have you heard of Dave Wood, who formed Dallas National Insurance? Anybody ever met Dave or heard of him?
I have.
Yeah, Dave is a controversial figure. He's not in good graces with the state of Florida right now, although I hear he lives in Naples now. But yeah, he formed, he's the one that started the AMS staff leasing plan, which is basically the Amway of PEOs. You could buy an AMS franchise and work off the master PEO. But he told me once, he said, what do you think is the most expensive code on my book? And we were thinking, what do you mean, like roofing? So he says, no. Which code do you think costs me the most in claims?
There we go.
What was that?
The admin code.
Yeah, 8810. Exactly right. The 8810 costs him more than any other code because the rate was so low and yet the frequency of claims was higher than it should have been. So it's obviously one of the most miscoded codes, right? Another one is 5606, which is the supervisor. A lot of the folks you're dealing with, those small contractors, with 5 to 10 employees, they try to put one person in as a 5606 as an on-site supervisor. And what I've been taught time and time again is that the 5606 is not on the roof. The 5606 is the guy that's sitting in the construction trailer, or he's driving around in the pickup truck. He never does any actual work. He's any physical labor. He's doing management. And that's a very common miscode too. So is 8742 is another one that gets miscoded a lot. People get put in that code that don't belong in there. Anyway, so we know that comp is a part of what they want to make. And I believe everybody is familiar with administrative and loss costs. If you're not, should I go into this? Well, real quickly, Florida is an administrative state, which means everybody pays the same rate per code. The codes are set by the Department of Insurance, oddly enough, although NCCI always sets the rates and then gives them to the Department of Insurance, and then they approve them. There are other states that use loss cost down here, which every year the carriers submit their what they call Unistat reports, and NCCI figures out the cost for those codes for that particular carrier rather than the whole state. So you can think about it. It's a macro or a micro analysis. In an administrative state, it's macro. The whole state gets the same rate. In a loss cost state, each carrier gets their own rate per code. All right. This is something I am, people ask me a lot. I'm sure they ask you this. Does the PEO provide workers' comp? You know, if like I had a small contractor come to me and says, I need workers' comp. Can I get workers' comp from a PEO? How do you answer that? Typically,
My answer is the PEO provides workers' comp for all the employees in the PEO.
that's the right answer. Is the client paying workers' comp premium?
No.
That's correct. The client is paying for employer services. That's why PEOs can charge whatever they want. Now, most of them use the rate in their quotes. In fact, some of them even break it out, which I really don't think they should do. By the way, I referenced EOR here. That was from a couple classes ago. We talked about employer of record. It's a more common occurrence now in the state of Florida, and it looks like it's going to stay here because I have been told unofficially, you know, off the record by some people up in the Department of Insurance that they have no intention of pursuing staffing companies doing EOR because they perform a necessary service. They keep people out of the state fund. So when I say PEO and EOR, they have a master policy that covers their employees. So when you go to a PEO, the outsourced employees are covered on the PEO or the EOR's master policy or whatever policy has been assigned to those clients. The company is not covered. There was recently a bill introduced to change that in the state assembly. Fortunately, they voted it down because that would have gotten very expensive. They would have required PEOs to put an endorsement on their policy for every client, where the client would be covered. And so in other words, the PEO would then be liable for all the subs of their client. And that would have killed our business. We wouldn't have been able to provide workers' comp for those people that are tough to get right now if the PEO would have also had to cover subs. I know that lawyers are trying to get that in there and they want that. And the state kind of wants that, but the state also realizes that the advantage the PEOs are providing would go away if they had to cover subs. Technically, say you got, you know, Joe's Drywall, he has a traditional comp policy. He goes on a site and he hires Bob and Jeff, who are 1099s. Technically, his policy is not supposed to cover them either. But sometimes they put in an endorsement in the policies that says they will cover them. I didn't want to get too deep into workers' comp, but if somebody asks you, does a PEO provide comp? You tell you it'll provide comp for your employees. That's the proper answer. And unless you're a property and casualty agent licensed with a 220, you probably shouldn't discuss it any further. Yes, David?
How would you define the difference between PEO and EOR?
I happen to have a diagram of that if I can find my, okay. This is the PEO, right? We got shared responsibilities between the employer, the PEO, and the employee. Responsibilities and liabilities. As you can see that the employer and the PEO are truly in a co-employment situation. They both have responsibilities and duties to the employees and vice versa. Now, the EOR looks quite different. The EOR basically becomes the employer of record. EOR is what employee leasing used to be. It's been outlawed in all states except Texas and New Jersey, but New Jersey has other rules that make it impractical. So the only state that's doing true employee leasing right now is Texas. The EOR, the employees become completely in control of the EOR, of the staffing company. And the staffing company determines what they do, where they go. And now we know in reality that the employer is going to call up, is going to tell the employees, go do this, go do this, go do that. But according to the way the law looks at it, they're employees of the staffing company. They're not employees of the employer anymore. He has some kind of contract with the employer, but technically he's supposed to call up the supervisor at the staffing company and say, tell my employees to do this, or, he can't really fire anybody. He can just call up the staffing company and go, get this guy off my lot, and then they'll take them somewhere else. So they remain employees of the staffing company, technically. Now, we all know what happens. They're really functioning as a PEO. They will, if an employer says get rid of somebody, the EOR will fire them. If the employer says I want to hire somebody, the EOR will hire them. That's sort of the gray area. But this is why a lot of people say EORs are actually functioning as a PEO, and they should be licensed as a PEO. And it's why it's technically, well, if they have more than 100 employees, they're required to have a license, and some of them do. So they're illegal if they have more than 100 employees. But I was told by the state that there are no plans in the immediate future to go out and enforce that at all, because the EORs are providing a valid function. They are keeping people employed and covered on workers' comp that would have to go on the JUA otherwise. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much. I just wanted to hear another explanation for it. So how would you define the difference between an EOR and a staffing company?
Well, an EOR is a staffing company. Yeah. It's a staffing company that's functioning as an employer of record. But they're not a licensed PEO. Well, they may be. We know, do you work with Key HR?
Mm-hmm.
I know you work with Key HR. Well, you know that they have, what is it, Founders, or what's the name of their staffing company? Frontline. Yeah. Well, Frontline is an independent entity that just does staffing, but they will put some of their PEO clients with Frontline. And that's in this situation right here, which is technically illegal because they have over 100 employees and a PEO license is required. And they may say like, oh, well, we're part of the Key HR master license. And I don't know if they are or not. Really, I've never asked Shane how that works, but I know it works. So, and I use them. I use EORs. We have 30 employees right now that are with EORs through about 5 different clients. And I put them there because nobody else would take them, at least not for a reasonable price. Southeast wanted, money out, deposits out to Yin Yang, and, Pride Risk wanted a $2,500 setup fee. I just wasn't going to do that for a 3-man contractor. So I think they're a very useful part of the scenario, the landscape. But I do think that there's going to be some legislation eventually that lets them do what they do to a certain extent, but not as much as they're doing it now, because they are competing with PEOs, and they have an unfair advantage. They don't have to maintain all the standards that PEOs maintain. I'm breaking my own rule. I'm talking more than asking questions. What do you think it will happen with this, David?
With the EOR, I'm not really sure. We're doing the same thing. We're taking advantage of it right now while it's working. I was only recently made aware of the fact that it was illegal. I was not aware that that was something that they couldn't do without a license. I get that they're acting as a
Once they have 100, once they hit 100, the law states you're supposed to have a PEO license.
Gotcha. I mean, if they don't have 100 worksite employees, then we're not really working with them. So
Well, it's a definition thing. See, the state defines you can have 100 of your temporary staffing people. You can have more than that. But as soon as you have more than 100 permanent staffing who are with a single employer, if you add up all the people who are with a single employer and they're in a permanent position, once it gets over 100, and it looks, the law says if it simulates a co-employment agreement, then they require a co-employment license. If you go back to the, why isn't this thing working? You go back to PEO, the thing that sets this apart from staffing is that this little gray area right in here is defined by the contract service, the client service agreement, the CSR. That's the whole thing that makes PEOs work, is the client service agreement, the CSA. I'm sorry, CSA. Which for pretty much all the PEOs in Florida was written by Mike Miller. The guy literally wrote the book. He wrote all the laws that govern PEOs. And he writes, his people write most of the client service agreements. And the difference between an EOR is they don't have a client service agreement, at least not one that's approved by the state and not one that's maintained by the DBPR. And see, that's probably where they're going to get them, is they're going to go to EORs and tell them, that's what I do. When you do it, I just say like, hey, I want you to file your CSA with us, the way all the PEOs do. Wouldn't you expect that's probably what they're going to do?
So what I don't understand, though, is if they are the employer of record, I get that it is technically illegal, but they are taking all of the responsibility. It's not necessarily a co-employment relationship. They're taking the responsibility. So they're saying, you're now employees of ours.
That's right.
Just putting you on this job site or that job site or that, whether they have direct oversight of the employees or not, they're choosing to give up that direct oversight.
Well, this goes back to the 80s when it all started. When Staff Leasing and Whack and Hut, they started the whole PEO thing, right? Right down the street. Where are you in Tampa? Is that where you are?
Clearwater. Yeah, we're up the road from Sarasota.
Okay, you're closer. So you're in Bradenton?
No, north of Bradenton.
Okay, well, Bradenton's where it all started. With Whack and Hut and Staff Leasing, it was from the way I was told it happened, and then again, this is third hand from the plumber's pool man's cousin or whatever. Is that these technical companies found out, and particularly security guards, found out that they could fix their costs by hiring temporary employees on a permanent basis. It was called permanent staffing, and it wasn't, they called it reverse staffing, because other companies who had all these employees, the only alternative they had was to fire all their employees and put them with a staffing company, which they started doing. The staffing companies would go to like Lockheed, well, Martin Marietta was then, some of the bigger companies, Honeywell, like, we will take some of your local employees. The technical firms have national employees and local employees. They have to go nationwide to find engineers because there just aren't enough here locally to do this. They look for special talent. But for people who are going to be security guards sitting at the gate, admin people, the support staff, that's someone you can hire local because it doesn't require a high degree of technical expertise. So they would tell them, this is how much you're going to pay, X dollars an hour for those people. And they could build that into their contracts, the government contracts, and they could be very competitive. And so that's when Whack and Hut, I believed, even though they weren't the first PEO, they were the first one to start going after employee leasing. They were the first ones to go to like airports and places like that and say, hey, we can give you fixed costs for your security staff. And then next thing you know, somebody, I think it was Staff Leasing, who later became Jevity. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. But they split too, because Billy Mullis was involved in all this. And one of his company, I believe, was called People Lease. And he eventually became ELS, Employee Leasing Solutions. But they started this thing called employee leasing for construction. And so they got into the construction place because that was a hard workers' comp market. And they were using CNA insurance. And they were doing a bundled rate. It was a big mess. But the state saw that it was a positive thing, but being abused. So the Board of Employee Leasing was born. That was back in but basically EOR is a return to those days. You know, you're going to people and saying, look, we'll hire all your employees. They'll work for us. You'll just pay us, you know, to hire them. And it's back to pure employee leasing. It's not co-employment anymore. Okay, we got enough of that one. How many of your PEOs honor the cutoffs? Everybody knows what a cutoff is, right?
Yeah, pretty much all of ours honor it. We have one or two that don't, but only on smaller companies under 200,000 in payroll.
I run into like one that notably does not do cutoffs is BBSI in California, but they blend it. They don't do the cutoff. They charge the same thing every week, although it'll be a lower than the actual SUTA. You know, if the company's got a 5% SUTA, which is not unusual in California, they'll just quote them 3.7, and they'll just charge that all year long. So, and a lot of people say that's crooked or illegal. It's not. You know, they can charge whatever they want. But I think it's fair if a PEO builds the cutoffs into their price somehow. If they don't, then they're using it as a profit center, which that's fine. I mean, they're allowed to do that. I know that back in the early, like mid-2000s, the state was going after PEOs that were quoting a SUTA rate, but paying a different one. I think, Otelia, were you with MBA then?
I have been with MBA since 2005.
Well, that was because I remember talking with Jay Rice about that. Is that they had quoted somebody a price of like 1.5 SUTA, but they put them on one of their shells that was a 0.1. And the state came in and with a letter, I think it was MBA that got investigated for that. Because I remember it was 2003. That's when that happened. So that was before your time. Okay. That's when I was working as an auditor. But, you know, SUTA is just so as long as people understand that the PEOs can charge whatever they want because they are not charging FUTA SUTA. But I think if they disclose it in their quotes, it does give them a kind of a liability. Tom Natoli taught me he never breaks down his quotes. He says, this is the rate. And then this is the rate after cutoff. He doesn't say this is the rate. Here's social, Medicare, SUTA, FUTA, AMP, comp, admin. He never breaks it down. He just gives them a number. And that's his reason, because he wants to avoid the liability.
Will,
Go ahead.
correct me if I'm wrong, but back in the days, bundling the rates was a lot more popular. The PEO would present, hey, your total burden is this much, and it's my problem. Your SUTA is my problem. Your payroll taxes are my problem. So it became more recent that PEO unbundled, and I think it's the competition that is now, okay, well, let's see how transparent we are. So it used to be a lot more craftable because they would just say, hey, 18% on total payroll.
Okay, I've had trouble hearing most of that because I'm an old fart, but what was the question?
Back in, it's not a question, is I remember that back in the days, PEOs used not to unbundle their rate. It used to be a total burden of, let's say, 18%. And then they would say, hey, your SUTA is not your problem. Your SUTA is my problem. Your comp is my problem. This is your total burden. This is what you're paying. And it's none of your business. And now I think the competition in the industry has forced PEOs to disclose and be transparent and show, okay, well, we're cheaper by half a point. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's my opinion.
No, you're correct. And I agree with that. I agree with the first part of it. It's not their problem. I would tell somebody, you're not paying SUTA. I'm paying SUTA. You're just paying me to be your employer. But if you want to know how I figured out my number, this is how I figured out my number. No, and you're right. There is a lot of competition because people will say like, well, I want to see the breakdown. And that's kind of why this is an advanced class. I'm going to do this a few weeks from now, but you get into price competition and people start asking about price. Well, what's the price? I always ask them, do you want to know the price or do you want to know what it's going to cost you? And people will say, well, what's the difference? I go, well, what's the cost of a free kitten? By the way, the vet bill for a kitten with feline leukemia can go over $10,000. So, you know, that's why I started getting into pain-based selling rather than price-based. I'll ask them like, okay, you have this problem, you got this problem, you got this problem. You told me that you wanted to spend this amount of money. I found you a PEO that fixes that problem, that problem, that problem, is less than that amount of money. What do you want to do? Okay. I don't do, like, we talked about this at the, not this last Brokers Club, but the first, actually, no, it was at the one Rod Dykema does, In Sync. A few years ago, we were asked to talk. It was me and Michael and Claudio got up there, and we said one of the big problems that brokers do, one of the things they do that I don't like, I call it stupid broker tricks, is they spreadsheet. You know, they show a spreadsheet like, here's PEO A, PEO B, PEO C, here's the rate, here's the rate, here's the rate. Which one do you want? And it turns it into a price beauty contest. I don't know if you still do that. We did it when we got started. That's what we would do. We would spreadsheet. And then I realized that what was happening is that they were always taking the cheapest PEO. And our commissions were small. We weren't making the amount of money we should be making for the amount of work we did. So now when I tell people, says, listen, I'm going to go do the comparison. You just tell me what you want to spend and you tell me what you want fixed. And then when I come up with a solution that fixes problem for $1, and you're the decision maker, then what are we going to do? And then I want a commitment from them at that point. In other words, I've got the pain, I've got the budget, and I've got the decision. And once I have that, I have the deal. And you know, and I don't give out quotes. I don't know how many, you probably are giving out quotes right now, aren't you? I'm not seeing anybody nodding, shaking their heads.
Yeah, we do. We don't do spreadsheet. We do best quote. We'll send out to 2 or 3 PEOs. We try not to flood the market with a lot of quotes, and then we come back with the best option for the client.
But do you give the prospect a quote?
Yes.
Okay. I've stopped doing that, and it was very difficult. But I'll tell you why. Because I'd give a prospect a quote, and what is the first thing that the prospect tends to do with it?
Take it to the other PEO and say, okay.
Trying to get a lower rate from the PEO that they're with or another PEO that they're looking at.
They shop it, right? They go back to their current vendor and go, hey, look, I just got this quote. Can you beat it? And what do? They say, well, geez, we don't want to lose the client. We'll match it to keep you. And who wins in that situation? And before you say the client, think about it. Obviously, we don't win. We lost, right? The current vendor loses because they just are now making less money for doing the same work. But what happens if you're making less money? Do you keep doing the same work? I don't. I mean, I'm sure the PEOs are the same way. Like, I'll give you, you can go talk to this company. It's called Firkin and Kegler. It's a local bowling alley restaurant business here. And this is before I got sales training. I was brought in there by one of the owners because he knew I did PEO brokering, and they had an independent HR agent. His name, Lady Connie. She was handling everything for them. And she said, I said, what are you paying now? And she said, well, I don't want to tell you. I said, well, I've got to see let me see. They were with ADP. I said, let me see your ADP bill. just so I can see how many employees you got and what the average payroll is. She goes, well, I'm not going to do that. And this is before I was trained, and so I did something stupid. I went over her head. I went to the guy who brought me in. He goes, she's not giving me the ADP quote. I can't tell what you're doing. So the next time I met with her, she hands me this photocopy of the ADP bill with all the numbers blacked out. So you can tell there was a lot of trust there. I said, what do you want me to do? She goes, just give me your best price. So I went to a PEO I knew would give me a low price, and I said, give me your best price. I cut my commission down to nothing because they had 150 employees. I wanted to get this one. You know, it was going to be the old feather in the cap. So I bring in this really low price, and she looks at that and she says, that's really cheap. How can you do it that cheap? And I said, well, you told me to give you your best price, and I want you as a client. I sharpened my pencil. I hate that expression. Sharpened my pencil and came up with this price. And she said, well, I'm going to meet with the board tomorrow with the meeting. And on the agenda, it's on the agenda right now to talk about our payroll situation. I don't see why they wouldn't go with this. Look, I mean, this is way cheaper than what we're paying now. Why don't you call me tomorrow afternoon and we'll figure out what to do then? Now I go away thinking what? Got one, right? What have I got? Ted, you know the answer. You've heard this.
Go ahead.
I got nothing.
Yep.
What did she commit to? Did you hear any commitment in what she told me? She said I could call her the next afternoon. Did she say she was going to answer? I called her for 3 months. Got voicemail, texted her, emailed her, nothing, right? I was in voicemail jail. Finally, my sales trainer said to me, he goes, hey, I got an idea. He goes, here, give her a call on my phone. Use my phone. So I picked up his phone and I dialed in her number. She answered. I said, hey, Connie, it's Will Tenney. How are you? She goes, oh, hey, Will, did you get a new phone? And I found out later because I happened to be sitting at a coffee shop with a guy from ADP. Now, I remember, this is, 15 years ago. I'm sitting with this guy from ADP and he's complaining. We're across the street from the Firkin and Kegler. And he said, that's my client over there. And I go, oh, yeah, that's your client? He goes, yeah, they used to be a good client. I went, what do you mean used to? He says, well, some idiot came in and gave him this really low quote. And we had to match it. And we're losing a ton of money on them. And they're about to get terms. And this was like 6 months after I'd given them the quote. I said, really, you're going to term them? He says, yeah, we're not making our nut on them anymore. And if we raise it, they're just going to go with that other quote. So we're probably just going to term them. And he goes, boy, if I could meet the jerk that gave him that quote. And I just kind of went, hey, Bill, sorry. But that was the first. And he goes, you did that? You're smarter than to do that. What did you give him that quote for? I said, well, I wanted the business. He says, that was like 20% of what we were charging. How could you guys do it that cheap? But never mind. So I learned my lesson. I don't give out quotes anymore because that's what happens. They're just going to take your quote and shop it around. I mean, I'll say it over the phone, Hey, I think, you told me to keep the admin fee under 3%. It's going to be under 3%, They can fix this. Your comp's going to be covered. You're going to get certs. You're just going to have to put up a $1,000 cert certificate fee or whatever. But, what do you want to do? And if they say, send me the quote, well, I could send you the quote, but can I ask you something? Do you trust me? And they'll say, oh, yeah, of course we trust you. So then why do you need the quote? What will you do with the quote? And I love the answers I get sometimes. Well, because they're not going to say, yeah, I trust you, but I'm going to take this over to my current vendor because one of our biggest problems we face, and is this wrong? Is changing payroll companies simple? Anybody?
No.
Is it easy? Or is it a huge pain in the ass? How many of you have been on an HR staff before? Anybody? I have. Changing a payroll company is not a simple, it's a very painful process, right? Everybody has to fill out applications again. You got to go get everybody to filling out the I-9. If you're with a company that does that, you have to get somebody independently to verify them. You got to get everybody in place, especially if you're dealing with health insurance. You got to do an enrollment. And for an HR person, it's a major pain in the butt. So if they can figure out a way to get what they want from their current vendor, they're going to do it. And, you know, I'm in this business for profit. I don't know about you. Is anyone else in this business for profit besides me? I don't see any hand. Oh, David is. Okay, yeah. I don't want to do business for ADP. And I definitely don't want to help them either. You know, I don't want to give a quote just so I can mess up somebody else. So I advise one thing. If you take away one thing today, it's try to avoid giving out written quotes. All right. By the way, here's the cutoff limits in the various states. I thought this was interesting. Yes, David.
Well, we got to get running. We got a company meeting coming up here in a little bit. We got to get to. So
it's 10:26. Yep.
Yep. We got to get going. So
I just was going to talk a little bit about. Let's see if there's anything here that matters. No, we can go right to lessons learned. Is there anybody that can share us a lesson learned? Something they learned they're going to take away. Something heard today they never knew before. Go ahead.
Don't give out written proposals. Try to get them presented orally.
Good. Thank you for taking that one. Anybody else?
Well, it's a negotiation. Why give them a quote, proposal, anything without some commitment from them?
Agreed.
A contract, both parties are making a contribution.
Even a spoken contract, you know, some kind of commitment. Yeah.
Here's what you do. Here's what I'll do. Here's where we're going to go.
Right. It's all about establishing the rapport too. You need to have the rapport and the trust to where they don't look at you just as a vendor.
I've asked companies before directly, do you see us doing business together?
It's a good one.
And I ask prospects all the time. I ask them, should you be on my prospect list? And they'll be honest with you. Yes, no, maybe. And it hurts my feelings when they say no. But then I say, next, I've got a slot open. Who qualifies to be my new prospect?
David, Sabina, Otilia, will you all have time to talk later? I'd like to get your feedback on, you know, and positive and negative, you know, criticisms and constructive criticism. What should we be doing? What would make it worth it? Something like that. I know you got to go to your meeting now, but can we talk later?
yeah, definitely.
All right. It's 10:30 here. Thank you. We'll be doing this again next week. David, let me know if you know, what you think.
Will do. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Go sell.
Thank you.